Earlier, John said we're continuing our series today in Nehemiah, and we are. The series called From Rubble to Return. Nehemiah, if those of you that have been here, a little bit of review for you. Those of you that haven't, kind of bring you up to speed. Nehemiah is an Old Testament character, and there's a book in the Old Testament named after him. His story, as we're discovering in this series, is incredibly poignant, incredibly relevant to us in our lives today and where we land. His story is actually really fascinating because if you've been through the series, you already know this, but Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king of Persia, which is this massive empire when we're first introduced to Nehemiah. This massive empire includes Israel, includes Jerusalem and the temple. And when we meet Nehemiah, he is the cupbearer to the king of Persia, and his grandfather had given permission to the people of Israel, had actually given them a decree and said, I want you to go rebuild your city. I want you to go rebuild it and make it the beautiful, wonderful place that God intended it to be. I want you to be the beautiful, wonderful people that God intended you to be. And so what happened was, and we discover this in Nehemiah's story, is that about 90 years later, after this decree had been given, Nehemiah gets a report about what's going on in the city of Jerusalem, and he discovers that actually it doesn't look anything like what anyone imagined. That instead of the people flourishing, the people are floundering. And instead of living in this renewed city, the city is actually a city of rubble, and it's a city of destruction. And so Nehemiah's heart in this moment is broken. He's absolutely broken. And what's beautiful about this story is that it parallels our life in the sense that you and I oftentimes are faced with the brokenness of the world that we live in. We see things, we hear things, we know things are messed up, and our hearts oftentimes break for those things. And Nehemiah beautifully shows us what it looks like for our hearts and our desires to break for something other than our own comfort. In fact, that's one of the major principles that we're seeing in this series. One of the truths that we're walking through is that rather than Nehemiah's life being about self-improvement, his life is actually about the improvement of other people's lives. His desire is to see other people thrive and flourish, not just his own. And that's a message, I think, in our culture, in our society today, especially as it relates to where we live every single moment of our lives. That's a completely contradictory message to the one that we're constantly hearing. Just this last week, I was reading an article in Psychology Today about some of the psychological issues that are in our culture. In this particular article, there was a reference to a study done a couple of years ago where researchers scoured all of the printed material, like digitally scanned all of the printed material over the last several hundred years that has been produced in the English language, and saw themes. They were looking for particular themes, and one of the themes they saw was that there was an increase in words like an increase in I can do it myself, or words like the self included in that. Like the idea of individualism was an increased reference point, while simultaneously there was a decrease over the last couple hundred years in words like collective or share or band together or common good. The reoccurring usage of those words was going down. Also, interestingly enough, simultaneously with that, the words like virtue and conscience, those actually appear less in printed material. And self-betterment, self-strengthening, self-improvement occur more frequently than ever before in history. First week I mentioned this, the self-help industry in America, $10 billion industry. And it's not just like the world that thinks this way. There were 1,000 people recently polled about church, and they were asked the question what the purpose of the church is. Like, why does the church exist? And 89% of the people responded by saying that the church's purpose was to take care of my family's needs and my spiritual needs. And only 11% said that the church is for impacting the lives of other people. So we live probably in the most self-centered culture in history. And the question is, how's that working for us? Like, are the kids any happier today? Are the marriages any more whole? Are mom and dad getting along better? Are things really thriving? Are communities feeling this? Like, I think there's this real honest evaluation that occurs when you start asking questions. We're probably the most selfish we've ever been, and yet at the same time, we're probably the most dysfunctional that we've ever been, which should tell us that something's broken. Now, there's a side of this, and I know like some of you are like, great, awesome, I'm glad I came to church again, one more week to hear about how selfish I am. This is awesome. Let me just say this. Obviously, there's a part of this where this whole self-improvement thing goes awry. There's another part of this that I think is beautiful and wonderful, and I just want to share this. I think that for most of us, the reason that we're drawn towards self-improvement, the reason that we're drawn towards making our lives better is that deep inside of us, it isn't that we want to be selfish, it's that we want to make a difference, right? We want our lives to matter. I think for most of us, we've had some moments where we've served, we've done something for another person, and there was like that spark inside of us that was like, man, that felt really great. Or we've done something, we've impacted someone's life, and they've come back to thank us. There's a part of our being, a human, that says, I want my life to count for something. And the way that we pursue that is just the way our culture shows it and says, well, make yourself better. Like, you work on you, and maybe you'll make a bigger difference. Our culture tells us that may be broken, but the heart of that thing, I really believe, is beautiful. You and I want our lives to matter. Amen? I mean, don't you at the end of your, think about the end of your life, imagine as you're going to heaven, because there's lines and stuff in heaven too. But imagine you're in a line at heaven, all of a sudden you realize it's a receiving line, and everyone's just thanking you. Thank you so much. Thank you for investing. Thank you for meaning. It's that would be an amazing thing, right? To end your life and see a line of people saying thank you for spending your life the way that you did. That's something I think we all desire, and that's why this story is so powerful. Because at the same time our culture is telling us that we pursue this through ourselves, Nehemiah says, no, there's a different way. And if you get this, you will find meaning like no other. So we're looking at the story of Nehemiah, and we're answering very specific questions that are presented in this story. In week number 1, we looked at chapter 1. In chapter 1, there was this one question that kind of came out of it, and it was really what breaks our heart. We see Nehemiah's heart being broken for something other than himself, which leads us to ask, is our heart being broken? Are we the kind of people that when we hear about injustice or brokenness, we just see messed up stuff in the world and it doesn't have to do with us? Are we the kind of people who go, man, that breaks my heart? Are we open to that? Do have our hearts broken for what breaks the heart of God? We just sang those words. Are we the kind of people that just don't like seeing people flounder? That's the first question that we asked. And then last week we looked at chapter 2. We asked a different question, and that's, well, what are you going to do about it? And really what we said was, beyond just having a broken heart for the brokenness in our world, we actually need to get uncomfortable. That if we're going to do something about this brokenness in our world, if we're going to solve things that are messed up around us, if we're going to go from floundering to flourishing the way that God intends, it means we have to get uncomfortable. We might have to risk a little bit. In fact, we might have to put our comfort and our own desires on hold in order to do something for another person. That's what we've been learning through this. We've been discovering that sometimes for you and I to be the people we've been created to be, we got to get off the couch and do something about it. And so we talked about that. We got to be uncomfortable. What are you going to do about it? Which really leads to a third question, and it's a question that this week I've heard a couple of different times, actually probably a dozen times this has happened this week, where people have either run into them or they've called me, we've sat down and we've talked about this, and they've said, I get it. My heart's broken, and I absolutely know I need to do something that's not just for me, and I know that I need to get uncomfortable. I know I need to make some sacrifices, but then they ask this, where do I begin? Where do I start this? And my guess is that you're probably thinking the same thing. I know some of you maybe you've answered this, and I want to encourage you. If you're already living this, let this series just be a massive encouragement to you. But if you're the person who's you go, man, you're right. I need to do more than just me. I need to live beyond myself. If that's you, I guarantee you get this question of, but what do I do, right? What do I do? Where do I begin? And what's beautiful and amazing about the story of Nehemiah is that he answers this question for most of us. Yeah, sure, every once in a while there's this 1% of people who go do something crazy and outlandish. But for the rest of us, Nehemiah actually shows us how to answer the question, where do I begin? So today we're going to dive into chapter 3. So week 1 was chapter 1, week 2 was chapter 2, week 3 is chapter 3, a third question answered in chapter 3. And let me just say this, like a warning, ready? Chapter 3 is about as exciting as reading a phone book. All right? And I know some of you, I need to explain what a phone book is. Back in the day, right? Back in the day, some of you younger people, you got this book delivered to you and it had names and addresses and numbers, and it was a phone book, all right? And you never sat down and read it because it's really boring. Well, that's what chapter 3 is like, right? Chapter 3 is about that exciting. But here's the deal. Here's the deal, and this is really cool. Like when I saw this, it was like one of those things I was like, man, maybe I could preach a message on this. Maybe it'll only be 15 minutes long, but everyone will appreciate that too. But there's this really cool thing that's embedded in the middle of this. And so when I first started reading chapter 3, I saw this thing kind of rise out of this, and I was like, man, this is amazing. Like, this is actually a really cool insight that's buried in the middle of some really boring stuff. And so we're going to read some really boring stuff with the hopes that you get as excited about this as I did when I saw this, because I think this is really cool. So Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 1 is where we're going to start reading. And just the background, this is where the story's been. Again, real quick so you know, Nehemiah's heart was broken. He shared that broken heart with Artaxerxes, the king of Persia. That king gave not only him permission to go to Jerusalem, but he gave him resources and said, I want you to go do this. He goes to Jerusalem. Last week, chapter 2, we saw that he inspected the wall. He saw how tragic everything was. Indeed, the reports that he heard were true. And so then he shares with the people, this is the situation. This is the vision for what we're going to do. And in chapter 3, what we're getting is the detailed outline of what actually happened after he shared that vision. So Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 1, this is exciting stuff. It says this, Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers, the priests, and they built the sheep gate. Isn't that exciting, right? They consecrated it, and they set its doors, and they consecrated it as far as the Tower of the 100, as far as the Tower of Hanel. And next to him, the men of Jericho built, and next to them, Zachar, the son of Imri, built. The sons of Hassanah built the fish gate. Wondered who built that, and now you know. They laid its beams and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. And then this is where the story really takes off. Verse 4, being sarcastic. Next to them, Miramoth, the son of Uriah, son of Hakaz, repaired. And next to them, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, son of, this is like just a vocabulary test for me, by the way. Meshezebabel repaired. Next to them, Zadok, the son of Baanah, repaired. Next to them, the Tekoites repaired. But their nobles would not stoop to serve the Lord. Different issue there. Joada, the son of Paseah, and Meshullam, the son of Besodiah, repaired the gate of Yeshanah. Like, and by the way, no one names, everyone's like, I want a good biblical name for my son. No one ever goes to Nehemiah 3 for that, right? Maranathanite. That's your new name. Anyway, so it goes on like this, right? So verse 7, verse 8, verse 9, it goes on like this. And then for real, this is where it really does get interesting. In verse 10, you see something. Something is said, and you're going to see it again and again. I'll point it out to you. But verse 10, you get down here, and it says, next to them, Jediah, son of Haramoth, repaired the opposite his house. And next to him, Haddash, the son of Hashbaniah, repaired. And then it continues on, verse 14, verse 15, so on. And this is what's going on. Name after name, section after section, you're being told who worked on what part of the wall. Then you come to verse 23 and you see this thing that you see in verse 10. Again, look at this. After them, Benjamin and Hashub repaired opposite their house. And after them, Azariah, the son of Messiah, son of Ananiah, repaired beside his own house. And then there's some more names and some more locations. And then verse 28. Above the horse gate, the priests repaired, each one opposite his own house. And after them, Zadok, the son of Immer, repaired opposite his own house. And after him, Shemaiah, son of Shechaniah, the keeper of the east gate, repaired. And after him, Hananiah, the son of Shelemiah. Got to get those two guys distinguished, right? And Hanan, the sixth son of Zalaph, repaired another section. And then after him, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, repaired opposite his chamber. Are you with me? Are you starting to see what's happening here? The chapter ends with a few more names, but I want to give you this description. This week I drew the city of Jerusalem and mapped this. I'm just kidding. I didn't. You guys are like, he's got way too much time on his hands. No, I Google image search. That's what I do, and it takes like 2 seconds. But this is an image of the city of Jerusalem at the time of Nehemiah. And this is what's happening in Nehemiah chapter 3. This is really cool. So what we're getting is we're getting the names of individuals, and then we're getting the very specific points along the wall of Jerusalem that they were working on. So when you get done with chapter 3, what you've gotten is this beautiful explanation of who worked on every section. Like somebody worked on the dung gate. And it actually tells you who. Poor guy got that one, right? But anyways, the rest of them, they're going around and they're like, okay, this guy got this and this and this and this. So by the time you get to the end of chapter 3, they've completed the wall. There's this picture of this is where everybody was working, and this is how this thing got done, how it got to here. But what's really cool is what you see when you look at this. Because inside and outside the walls of the city are what? Homes, right? And this repeating theme that we saw over and over again in this text, what was it? That these individuals were working on the portion of their wall opposite their house. They worked on the part of the wall that was in front of their house. Like, oh, that's where they lived, and so they worked there. And that's where they lived, so they worked there. Which brings us to this beautiful answer to this question that we're asking this morning of where do we begin? Like, where do we begin? All of these people were working where they lived. All of them were working right in front of their house. Like, they just, this is the picture, like every day, which, by the way, if you read these verses and you look at all of them and take the time to read them, you'll see that some of these people made perfume, which I guess was big back then. And there were people that were goldsmiths, and there were people that had regular jobs, and there were priests, people that were doing stuff in the city. And every day, this is what it's saying, is that they would come out of their houses. Like, the dad would go to work, and he'd kiss the kids and hug his wife, and like go out to the picket fence and open the fence, and there was the wall, and it was all crumbled down in front of his house, and he'd just shake his head and be like, man, somebody's got to do something about that. And then he'd go to work. And at the end of the day, he'd come home with his empty lunchbox, and he'd walk up to the gate, and he'd look to the right, and he'd see the wall in front of his house, and he'd go, oh man, that wall, like somebody's got to do something. And then he would go inside his house. And day after day, what Nehemiah recognizes, that's how people had lived, right? Right in front of their house. And I love this story. I love this. And here's why. Because I think so many times you and I, we hear messages like the ones we've heard over the last few weeks, and you feel this pull, this tension of, yeah, I do want my life to count. But then there's this pressure. Well, what do I do, right? What do I do? Like, do I need to go to Africa? Do I need to buy plane tickets? Do I need to put something on Facebook? Do a GoFundMe? I don't know. Am I supposed to just like pack it all in and sell my children and move someplace to make a difference in the world? Like, how do I do this? And there's this pressure that sets in, right? Like, I want to make a difference. I just don't know where. I just don't know how. Like, how is this going to happen? Which is why this story is so beautiful, because for the vast majority of the people who wanted to make a difference and who would wind up rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem, the place where they lived this out was right in front of them. If your heart breaks, if you want to do something that matters, and you ask the question, where do I begin? I know some of you like God spoke to you. I got this thing, I'm doing it, like somebody was like, we're fixing the horse gate, whatever that is, right? But then the rest of us, you go, I don't know where to begin. And you know what God says? Well, look outside your door. Why don't you start with what's right in front of you? Which is beautiful, because what that tells you and I is that this life that we're living really matters. It means this actually matters. This actually, like, what's in front of you. What's in front of you matters. You begin right here. This is where this whole thing starts. And here's why. If you want to understand something incredibly important today, I want you to get this. That God uses your circumstances. He uses your particular story. He uses all of the parts, the chapters of what He's been writing, so that you can accomplish what He wants you to accomplish in this world. Like, God positions you through your circumstances on purpose. You're where you are on purpose, which flies in the face of everything that we tend to think. We hear, well, I'm going to go make a difference, so I'm going to go somewhere else. What God says is, no, I've placed you here for a reason. Look out your front door. What do you see? I want you to accomplish something for me, and I've positioned you through circumstance right where I want you to do that, which means this: you and I should never, never underestimate the significance of what's right in front of us. Don't underestimate the significance of what's right in front of you. And don't underestimate what you can do about it. I get it. I get that these guys, they walk out their door, the family, mom, kids, they'd be playing in the front yard. They'd be looking at this crumbled wall in front of them. They go, man, somebody's got to do something about that. That they would look down the block and go, look at the rubble and the ruin all around us. What are we ever going to do? Like, somebody's going to solve that. But what am I going to do about this? I get that we get overwhelmed by that. That happens. A few years ago, we moved into a cul-de-sac on the South Hill that I think probably most of you have actually driven into. And here's why. At Christmas time, it glows like we're trying to draw like aliens from outer space to this cul-de-sac, like the Griswolds, because everybody on that cul-de-sac, they light their house for Christmas. Anybody light your house for Christmas? You do this, like you put, like and none of you do it like the street I used to live on, all right? So we moved in on this street, and it's just crazy. Like, we got there, and we're like, wow, these people really go all out. And so when we first moved into the house, our neighbors had also moved in next to us a short time before that. Some of you that went to Lincoln Heights or had kids at Lincoln Heights, Mr. Watson, Iran, a good buddy of mine, lived next door. And so Iran and I, we were like, man, like, the pressure's on right now. Like, our neighbors, they go all out. Like, they spend 3/4 of their income on Christmas lights. Like, it's amazing. Like everybody, like some of you know what I'm talking about. You've been to my old street. I'm sure you have. So this one Christmas, we're like, we got to do something about this. And so we decided maybe if we pulled our resources and kind of combined, because there was this big tree that we shared. We were like, maybe we could make something that could actually keep up with the Joneses here, right? And so we were like, all right, let's do this thing. And so we went and got all of our lights separately, but then we're going to combine it. He's a North Carolina fan. So he shows up with all white and blue lights. And I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, NC, man, we gotta represent. I'm like, yeah, but I got like all the colors of the rainbow over here. So we came up with a plan. Oh, and by the way, he also came out with a Christmas vest on and a little Santa hat. And I was like, dude, you're really taking this thing seriously. He's like, we gotta represent. So we get out there and like we take this time and like we're trying to put our lights up. At one point, our neighbor comes like halfway to the street because I think he was scared. Like halfway to the street, he's like, do you guys need my help? Both of us in that moment knew what the answer should have been. But we were like, no, we got this. Like, we got this. He's like, all right. And we had the like most Snoopy, awkward looking house on the block. Like there was no way to compete. But we both stood back. Like all Christmas, we would just stand like, it looks good. Like every time I came home, I was like, man, look at that. I have never spent so much money on Christmas lights in my entire life. I've never wasted more energy. Isn't this wonderful? Like, the electricity and the time and like the bulbs that go out that I have to fix when I get home from work. This is amazing, right? It was just like, and it never would have happened if it wasn't for my neighbors, right? Who put the pressure on me. By the way, a little side note, this year, I didn't put any Christmas lights up. I confessed this in the last service. No Christmas lights up. My kids didn't even notice. They never asked me. And I was like, yes, this is awesome. That's a side note. I'm probably dead next year. But that's what happens when you look around and you go, wait, what can we all do together? What happens when we bind together in this? These people looked at the wall and they said, I don't know what I'm going to do about this whole wall, but here's the deal. Something occurred in them that made them realize I can do something about this. I can't do anything about that or that, but I can do something about what's right in front of me. And that is key when it comes to answering the question of what are you going to do with what breaks your heart? You start right in front of you. I can do something about whatever it is that's right in front of me. Somebody's got to fix that, and that somebody is actually me. So they began to see this thing they'd been seeing for a long time very differently. And also something must have happened in their heart. Something must have changed that I think Jesus speaks to very specifically. There was a custom in the days of Jesus when he was walking with his disciples. There was a custom that when you went over to somebody's house for dinner, they would hire somebody to meet you at the door. This person was usually the lowest echelon of society. This is somebody who was absolutely desperate and destitute. They would hire somebody to greet you at the door, and that person's job was to kneel down as you entered the house and to untie your sandals and wash your feet before you came into the house. Remember, this is like a time and a culture when everybody's walking everywhere. Their feet are filthy and disgusting and sweaty and nasty. And this is the lowest of lows to be a person who does this job. But it was necessary because when you came to somebody's house for dinner, there weren't tables and you couldn't hide your feet underneath the table the way that we do today. There weren't chairs and tables. You actually had a table that you reclined at. And so when you reclined at a table, you kind of laid down on the ground next to the table, which means that as you were eating, your feet were next to the person next to you who was eating. And so if you didn't wash your feet, that was kind of nasty, right? So they had foot washers that would meet you at the door. In the book of John, we read that Jesus plans a dinner party. And whether it was like an administrative oversight and Jesus wasn't very detail-oriented or I don't know, but the 12 disciples show up at this dinner with Jesus. And as they come inside the door, there's no foot washer there. And there's this tension that rises up with the disciples. And they're like, well, we can't eat like this. who's going to wash whose feet? And you can just imagine the conversation, like the stuff going on in their heart. Like, dude, I've been a disciple like at least 4 weeks longer than you have. You're low man. Wash my feet. That's the stuff that's going through their mind. Like, this is nasty. Like, who's doing this? Here's what's amazing. So you read about this. So there's this tension. Like, no, man, I'm not going to serve. I'm not going to do that. That's gross. Like, this is building. And then it says in verse 2 of John 13, it says that at some point during this tension that the food got served. So they just override the custom and they decide, we don't care how nasty this is. We're just going to go ahead and eat next to each other's nasty feet because we'd rather do that than humble ourselves to serve. So they sit down at the table and they all start, the dinner begins. I'm sure the tension is now dissipating. They're like, all right, let's just settle in. Everybody's good. And now the dinner time table starts to, the conversation starts to happen. The chat starts to happen. And while it's beginning, suddenly something takes place. Jesus, who is obviously, he's already reclining at the table. Jesus now takes this basin and the jug of water and he starts moving. So imagine this. He takes off his outer garment like a servant would. And Jesus on the ground now with all of these guys around the table. They weren't all on one side, by the way. Despite what pictures you've seen, they weren't all like, hey, you guys need anything down there? Like why do we paint them that way? But we do. But they're all around this table. And the image is this, that Jesus has this bowl of water. And he's taking off their sandals and he's washing their feet. And then he's sliding this nasty bowl of water and he's moving across the floor and he's going to the next guy's feet and he's washing their feet. And he's just dealing with this disgusting, you can imagine the conversation at the table now has gotten really quiet, right? And it's really awkward because Jesus, their Lord and Savior, is crawling, sliding, moving, and sitting here and washing, and the room now is completely silent as he's dealing with the most disgusting thing and has humiliated himself to the lowest level. And it says that when he gets all the way around the table and he comes back, he sits back at his spot at the table and he looks at his disciples and he says these words in verse 12 of John 13. He says, "Do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, if I've done this disgusting thing for you, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I've done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him." So Jesus in this moment looks at his disciples and unapologetically, with no ambiguity whatsoever, he calls every one of his followers to acts of kindness and servanthood as low as foot washing, as low as serving at the lowest level of service. He says, I want the distinguishing characteristic of people who bear my name, people who follow me, to be that they serve in this sort of way. I want them to be identified from the rest of humanity as the individuals who would do something that is absolutely abnormal and ridiculous in people's view to serve another person. I want them to do what others are unwilling to do. I'm asking for my followers to go beyond what is the acceptable social norm, to look beyond their own concerns, to look beyond their own comfort or their own status or their notoriety, to actually serve, to go beyond their own wants and desires and sacrifice of themselves. He says, I'm calling all of my followers, every one of them, to take the basin and take the towel and to get down on their knees and to serve the people that are around them. It's an absolute transformation of the heart, and it's a complete reversal in what our culture is preaching to us every single day. Why do we do this? Because in front of your house, the wall's falling down. And the only way somebody's going to do anything about it is if you take the position of a servant and start serving. Which brings us to the question then, what's in front of you? What's in front of you? What is it that is in front of you? What is it that's right there in front of you? And this morning, John mentioned some opportunities to serve. Sometimes this stuff just gets mentioned. Hey, we need somebody to cook a meal or serve somewhere. Awesome. Maybe that's the thing that's right in front of you. Maybe it's something that's in your family. Maybe it's something that's in your word. Like, just like what's in front of you? What are the things that are right there? Like, you don't have to go somewhere. You don't have to buy a plane ticket. What's right in front of you? That's where you start. Imagine what happens. Imagine what happens if tomorrow you go to work, or maybe you go to work this afternoon, wherever you go to work. Like, you go to work, and when you show up at work, imagine if you walked in the door and your attitude, your heart towards the place and the people that you work with was a heart of service that Jesus modeled. Imagine how different it would be. Imagine if you went into that place and rather than feeling entitled, rather than feeling like you were owed something, rather than feeling like you just had to get in and get out without being noticed, whatever it is that your MO is for when you show up at work, imagine if instead of that, you showed up and you said, I want to come with a towel over my arm and I'm going to serve. And so there are things that I'm going to see people carrying and I'm going to help them with it. And there are going to be tasks that aren't on my job description, but I'm going to jump in and give a hand. There are going to be things that take place. And instead of me jumping in and participating in the gossip and the disintegration of that place, I'm going to be a person of hope, somebody that brings good and life into that situation. Imagine what would happen. Just your work, your mundane, everyday stuff that you do could suddenly be transformed if you begin to see it as the broken down wall that's in front of your life. What would happen if you took the posture of Jesus into that place? I think beautiful, amazing. I think pretty soon you start realizing there are other people that are building this thing up, and this thing could get pretty amazing. What would happen if you went into your home, the place where you live? Maybe you have roommates, maybe you have kids, maybe you have a spouse, maybe you have multi-generational homes or whatever. But what if you went into your house and instead of having this rules-based environment where everybody's looking to serve to get served, or where there's this reciprocal idea of if I do this, you do that, what if you just entered that place and you said, you know what, in my home, I just want to come with an attitude of service, that nothing is beneath me? What would happen in your house? I know for me lately, like, this has been like something for me. Like, I said this to somebody this week and they kind of laughed. I didn't think they didn't think I was serious, but like lately, like my big deal in my house, I've been doing the dishes. That's a big deal for me in my house because we have a really big problem with dishes in our house. And I have a tendency to rant about the dishes in our house because we have this amazing, some of you, I don't know if anyone else's house is like this, but we have a sink and we have a dishwasher and they are right next to each other. And somehow the sink gets filled with dishes, nasty, crusty dishes. And for whatever reason, the people that use the dishes can't take them from the sink and put them in the dishwasher that's right here. And so I rant. Amen? Anybody else do this, right? Like, so there are times it's like I have a tutorial and I bring everybody in the kitchen and I say, this is a sink and these are dishes and this is a dishwasher and what you need to do is this. And I've been ranting. I've been doing this so long. I think every neighbor in every house that we've ever had knows how much I hate doing dishes because I'm always ranting. Like, how hard is it to do this? Like, just do this thing, right? And then all of a sudden I took this attitude into my home and I said, well, what would it look like? And for whatever reason, like the thing that God puts in my heart, like, you should probably start doing dishes. I'm like, I just do my dish. So the last couple of weeks, I've just like, anytime I got a chance, just been like stepping into the kitchen and doing this thing, even putting on a little music, having fun with it, right? Just like jamming, doing the dishes. Like, this is great. Like, I'm reorganizing the dishwasher, having fun with this thing, right? Woo, this is cool. You could do it this way and this way. Oh, I never tried this, like I'm getting creative with it. And guess what? It's kind of how, it's like the environment changes. Things are a little different. But you know what's really happening? My heart's changing. My heart's changing and it's just something stupid and small. What would it look like? And what would it look like if you and I just opened up the door and stepped outside and said, what's in front of me? And then we took an attitude like the one that Jesus models for us and said, I'm just going to jump in and do what I can. I'm going to serve. And I'm just going to do something. What would happen if each one of us did that? Here's the deal. Every week, all I can do is talk about this stuff, and I can challenge you. You're the one that has to actually do something about it, not me. So I'm going to challenge you. Here's what I'm going to challenge you with today. I'm going to challenge you because... And this challenge has to do with you and I beginning to break the bind of the self. Like before you and I ever start doing, what am I saying right now? Before you and I ever start doing this larger thing that's in our life, It starts with us getting that heart of service, those small things, those little sacrifices. And so this is what I'm going to challenge you with. Before you leave here today, I want you to do something to serve another person. I just want to challenge you with that. Like, start really small. I realize that it's going to be tough getting out of the building today because you're all going to be at the door going, no, after you, no, after you, no, after you. But here's a little trick, a little inside trick. You can do this. You know what? I'm going to serve you by letting you serve me, and then you can go out. But whatever, like, you get it? Like, in fact, it was like the last 2 services, it's ridiculous. Like the guys in the bathroom, I had a guy hand me paper towels in the bathroom. He's like, here you go. I'm like, oh, this is awkward and weird. Just stop it. Don't make eye contact in here. Like guys don't do this. We don't talk. We don't make eye contact. You're in, you're out, right? That's what we do. But I want you to serve. Just figure something out. Just serve practically. Maybe it is open the door. Maybe it's, God forbid, let somebody into traffic ahead of you, right? Let them out onto the road in front of you, right? But do something to serve somebody, right? Maybe it's something that was mentioned. Maybe it's serving with our adoption and foster care. Maybe it's getting involved in our kids ministry. But I want to challenge you before you leave here today. And by the way, that's not why I'm preaching this message. I'm just saying this. Build a habit, do something, sacrifice your time, your energy, and put the towel over your arm and start to do something for another person. And then, second part of the challenge, do it again today. Do it a second time. When you get home, when you go to lunch today, do something sacrificial and service-oriented for somebody else. And don't expect anything from it. And watch what happens. I promise you. The rubble of your heart will start to experience the renewal and the refreshment and the life that Jesus promised you. Amen. Would you stand with me? Let's pray. Lord, this is so tough. This is so tough because if any one of us turn the TV on today, we're going to watch commercials that tell us it's all about us. And you know that. We're going to go to restaurants for lunch where everything in our culture has told us that the people that are serving us are there just to serve us and give us what we want. We're constantly bombarded with this message of it's all about us. And Lord, the challenge of making this about others flies in the face of everything our culture says. And so I just pray, Lord, for courage. I pray for strength, and I pray for even trust, that as we begin to sacrifice ourselves, as we begin to follow you to the nasty feet around us, that we would trust you, that this is truly the way of life and the way of hope, and that desire we have to make a difference and leave a mark in this life, Lord, I pray that we'd start discovering that by serving others. We love you. We thank you. We pray all of this in your name. Amen.